It's the economy, stupid. This iconic phrase, coined by James Carville, Bill Clinton's campaign advisor, defined Clinton's 1992 presidential bid for the White House. At the time, the United States was in the grip of an economic recession. President George H.W. Bush, seeking re-election for a second term, struggled to connect with ordinary Americans and address their financial concerns. Carville saw this economic discontent as Bush's Achilles heel and zeroed in on it as the key to Clinton's victory. He urged the campaign to focus relentlessly on one message: the economy. The strategy was simple: show voters how Clinton's economic policies would directly improve their lives and financial well-being. To drive the point home, Carville even hung a sign at campaign headquarters that read, "It's the economy, stupid." It became the campaign's unofficial slogan and a rallying cry for the team. The approach worked. Clinton won the election in 1992 and was re-elected in 1996. Since then, "It's the economy, stupid" has become a cornerstone of American political strategy, a shorthand for understanding voter behavior. Time and again, economic issues have proven to be the decisive factor in major elections. This same principle was later employed by Donald Trump in Trump's campaign against Kamala Harris, delivered a swift and surprising defeat, dealing her a decisive blow contrary to prior predictions. Leading up to the election, most analyses forecasted a tight race between Trump and Harris, predicting one of the closest contests in U.S. history with no clear frontrunner emerging by a significant margin. It's worth noting that many of these polls were conducted by major American media outlets, most of which either supported the Democrats or openly opposed Trump. In the end, Trump defied expectations, securing a decisive victory over Harris. One of the key factors behind Trump's re-election was the ever-reliable issue that dominates elections: the economy. Kamala Harris and the Democrats leaned on macroeconomic indicators, showcasing strong U.S. economic growth, declining inflation rates, consistent job creation, and America's solid position as the world's leading economy. Yet, these broad indicators failed to resonate with ordinary Americans, who didn't feel these gains reflected in their personal financial situations. Many voters placed the blame on President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris for not improving their financial well-being over the past 4 years. Numerous polls revealed that Americans held negative of the economy. The bottom line is, even if macroeconomic data highlights the greatness of the American economy, as an ordinary citizen, I'm paying a premium for my morning coffee, spending a third of my income on rent, unable to afford a home, and seeing the prices of basic necessities continue to rise. To hell with the data. I'm going to side with the person who promises me tangible improvements, like affordable housing and reduced personal debt. That's precisely the narrative Trump delivered to the average voter, and it resonated deeply, securing their support. Of course, Trump's return has shaken the world. There's a palpable sense of anticipation from most countries about what the world's leading policy maker, the U.S. president, plans to do next. In today's highly significant episode, we'll delve into the economic agenda of returning President Donald Trump. What are the plans he intends to implement in the next 4 years? Is he really going to shake things up as dramatically as many anticipate? And how will his agenda impact both the U.S. and global economies? This is a must-watch episode. Stay tuned until the end. Let's get started. After Donald Trump's victory in the U.S. elections and the early announcement of results on Wednesday, November 6, which defied expectations, U.S. stocks surged and continued climbing into Thursday. The major indices, Dow Jones Industrial Average, S&P 500, and Nasdaq Composite, all hit record highs. Meanwhile, the US dollar soared to its highest level in 4 months against a wide range of other currencies. But why did Trump's win specifically drive the stock market and the dollar to such heights? One of Trump's most notable achievements during his first term was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. This law, set to expire at the end of next year in 2025, became a focal point of his re-election platform. Trump now plans to reinstate all the tax cuts included in the legislation. To appeal to low-wage workers in industries like restaurants and to senior citizens, a significant voting bloc, he has proposed eliminating taxes on tips, Social Security benefits, and overtime wages. Additionally, he plans to introduce deductions for certain other income taxes. For businesses, Trump aims to slash the corporate tax rate from 21% to just 15%, arguing that such measures will stimulate economic growth and generate more job opportunities. On the other hand, these sweeping tax cuts will add approximately $5.8 trillion to the U.S. national debt over the next decade. This raises a critical question that Trump's campaign has yet to address clearly. How will these trillions of dollars, which will burden the U.S. Treasury, be covered? Trump's solution is straightforward. He plans to replace federal income tax revenue with extreme tariff revenues as a cornerstone of his economic strategy. This leads us to his second major economic policy proposal. Remember the trade war between the United States and China during Trump's first term in 2017 and 2018? That conflict will pale in comparison to what Trump now plans for international trade between the U.S. and the rest of the world. To begin, Trump has pledged to impose a blanket tariff of 10% to 20% on all imports into the United States, regardless of their country of origin. This means every product or service exported to the US will face these tariffs. And that's just the start. When it comes to China, Trump plans to go even further. Tariffs on all Chinese imports will exceed 60%. Unlike before, when he selectively targeted specific Chinese goods, this time he intends to impose these higher rates on every single product entering the US from China. Trump has also promised to target specific industries with extraordinarily high tariffs. For instance, car manufacturers using factories in Mexico to produce vehicles for sale in the US could face tariffs as steep as 200%. The same would apply to other products manufactured in Mexico specifically for the US market. In this approach, Trump isn't distinguishing between adversaries like China and allies such as Canada or the European Union. Everyone will be affected, though perhaps at different times. To further this agenda, he has also pledged to renegotiate the USMCA trade agreement that his administration previously struck with Mexico and Canada. Trump's reasoning is that these substantial tariffs will strengthen the US manufacturing sector by incentivizing companies to relocate production facilities back to the United States. This, in turn, would create jobs, inject billions into the American economy, and help offset the revenue lost from his proposed tax cuts. However, numerous studies suggest that the tariffs Trump imposed in 2018 were almost entirely paid for by American consumers and businesses. The logic is simple. The cost of tariffs is ultimately passed down to American consumers, either through higher prices for goods that still make it to the market or through the unavailability of certain imported products altogether. When certain goods are no longer imported, longer available, American companies may try to offer substitutes. However, these substitutes are typically priced only slightly lower than the tariffed products, reflecting how markets generally operate. Businesses won't miss the opportunity to maximize their profits, even if it doesn't align with Trump's policies. As the popular saying in the business world goes, don't leave money on the table. Companies will take any chance to secure easily attainable profits. The broader impact of these policies, as many economists predict, will likely be an increase in U.S. inflation rates. In mid-October, the Wall Street Journal conducted a survey of 50 economists, asking about the effects of Trump's and Kamala Harris's economic policies on inflation in the United States. A notable 68% of those surveyed stated that inflation, rising interest rates, and deficits would be higher under Trump's policies than under Harris's. The economists highlighted that prices would rise faster during Trump's term, driven largely by his aggressive tariff plans. These concerns aren't limited to a handful of experts. Last June, 16 Nobel Prize-winning economists signed a joint letter that served as a wake-up call. Among the signatories were prominent figures such as the renowned Joseph Stiglitz, Robert J. Shiller, famous for his mid-2000s warning about the housing bubble that materialized in 2008, Paul Romer, the former chief economist at the World Bank, and George Akerlof, a distinguished economist and the husband of U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. These 16 esteemed economists voiced serious concerns, warning that Trump's economic agenda could trigger significant inflation in the United States. They argued that his proposals would not only fail to combat inflation but would substantially worsen it. The letter emphasized that the outcome of the election could have long-lasting economic consequences for the U.S., potentially affecting its economy for years, or even decades, to come. They also cautioned that Trump's re-election would harm America's global economic standing and destabilize the domestic economy. And how did Trump respond to this warning from the group of economists? Pay close attention, because this is where the theme we discussed at the beginning of the episode becomes evident. Caroline Leavitt, Trump's campaign press secretary, issued a statement to U.S. media outlets, saying that the American people don't need out-of-touch, worthless Nobel Prize winners to tell them which president put more money in their pockets. Leavitt stressed that Americans are well aware they can't endure another 4 years of Biden's economic policies. She asserted that when Trump returns to the White House, he will reinstate his agenda to boost economic growth, lower energy costs, create jobs, reduce living expenses, and enhance the quality of life for all Americans. Leavitt also pointed out that Trump's proposed tax cuts, extreme tariffs, and other measures are designed to accelerate the economy, at a time when the Federal Reserve is actively working to slow inflation. The Fed had recently begun reversing its monetary policy, cutting interest rates by half a percentage point in September and by a smaller margin of 0.25% in November. This sets the stage for renewed confrontations between two figures with a well-documented history of discord: Trump, returning to the White House, and Jerome Powell, chair of the Federal Reserve. Those familiar with their past interactions will remember their contentious relationship, with Trump frequently clashing with Powell in attempts to influence the Fed's decisions, violating long-standing American norms of central bank independence from the executive branch. In fact, the skirmishes have already begun. Let's take a moment to reflect. Leaders exerting influence over central banks often experience greater economic instability. Trump has repeatedly made it clear that he wants some level of control over monetary policy, openly stating his intent to influence Federal Reserve decisions on interest rates. So, why is this a concern? What's the issue with a president, or any government, intervening in central bank policy? The core problem lies in the risk of a president, like Trump or anyone else, pressuring the central bank to keep interest rates artificially low to stimulate economic growth, even when inflation demands higher rates. If interest rates aren't adjusted as needed, the likely outcome would be a sharp rise in inflation, potentially spiraling out of control. Research from the Peterson Institute for International Economics, published last September, highlights that undermining the Federal Reserve's independence could lead to serious consequences. Higher inflation rates, capital outflows from the United States, a significant devaluation of the US dollar, and increased unemployment. Ultimately, these factors would culminate in a dramatic decline in the living standards of average Americans. Professor Warwick McKibben, an economist at the Australian National University and a non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute, emphasized that countries where central banks are subject to political interference often face greater economic instability. Independent central banks, McKibben noted, generally achieve lower inflation rates. He pointed to Argentina as a cautionary example, a nation whose central bank has faced chronic political interference, leading to the highest inflation rate in the world. But Trump's prior economic policies aren't the only potential drivers of U.S. inflation, which, as we've discussed in earlier episodes, inevitably impacts global economies. Developing and emerging markets are particularly vulnerable due to the ripple effects of rising U.S. interest rates. Now, Trump is planning another extreme policy that could have devastating consequences. Along with his running mate, J.D. Vance, Trump has pledged to execute the largest deportation program in U.S. history, aiming to remove 15 to 20 million undocumented individuals from American soil. This sweeping plan targets millions of undocumented workers, whom Trump and his vice president claim are killing jobs, driving up housing costs by competing for limited rental properties, and contributing to increased crime rates. However, implementing mass deportations on this scale would be catastrophic for the U.S. economy. These millions of workers, who take on low-wage, hard labor jobs and endure harsh living conditions, play a crucial role in the economy. Removing them would drive up wages, which in turn would increase consumer prices. Many industries and sectors rely heavily on immigrant labor. For example, about 16% of workers in the agriculture sector are undocumented. Removing this workforce would create labor shortages, driving up costs rather than reducing them, causing significant disruptions to the supply chain, and leading to higher food prices. The housing sector, already grappling with a severe housing shortage, also depends on undocumented workers, especially in home construction. Removing these workers would disrupt the construction industry and raise the costs of building new homes. In fact, the rise in immigration over the past 2 years has been one of the main factors behind the recent decline in U.S. inflation. Immigration addressed supply issues in the economy, improving supply chains and increasing the labor force, which helped balance supply and demand after the inflationary spikes of 2 years ago. Mass deportations, however, would create new shocks and drive inflation upward again. According to an analysis by the American Immigration Council, deporting 11 million people would cost the U.S. economy $315 billion. Moreover, millions of immigrant workers currently contribute to Social Security. Their sudden removal would disrupt funding for the program. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates that Trump's plans for mass deportations, tariffs, and tax cuts would bankrupt Social Security trust funds within 6 years of his return to office, leading to a nearly 30% reduction in benefits for current recipients. This would be a direct consequence of the reduced revenue flowing into the Social Security system. In conclusion, these are some key features of Trump's economic plans, which will not only affect the U.S. economy but also economies worldwide. Finally, do you think Trump's economic policies could lead to a financial market collapse, similar to the 2008 global financial crisis? I'll be following your responses in the comments.